Hey, and welcome to another episode of our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. I am your host, Eric, and today I am joined by Andrew Michél Thomas, who is a German-based Afro-Jamaican-Haitian-Canadian researcher. I love that. An English language teacher and intercultural trainer. Andrew's work centers on queer men and persons in the Afro-diaspora communities in Germany and Europe, with a focus on the city of Berlin. This includes, quote, mutuality of place, identity, and self-shape, belonging, inclusion, place, bond, or attachment to a place, end quote. Andrew and I connected via WhatsApp a few weeks ago, and it was an engaging conversation where we talked about careers, families, and our experiences as Black queer men. I am looking forward to what comes out of this discussion, learning more about who Andrew is and how he lives his life as a Black queer man in Germany. Hey, Andrew, and welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Eric. It was indeed a great conversation that we had a few weeks ago, and I was lucky enough to run across your podcast on Instagram. So I'm glad we're doing this.
It's a reminder to me, the gift of this, of course, is promoting individuals like you who are, I believe, shaping the future, the current, the present, and the future of our lives as Black queer citizens. But, you know, there's a fringe benefit for me that I get to connect with people like you. So, yeah, I greatly enjoyed that conversation. And I know you're still recovering from being under the weather. So thank you for taking time out to join us today.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no, it was pretty rough, but nonetheless, I do think it's important to speak on these issues. So I'm glad I'm better enough to join you today.
Are you an actor?
No, no, not even close.
I asked that because you're just seeing you now on camera and then just seeing your photos online. I was like, you look very familiar or remind me of an actor. So yeah, just wanted to ask that.
Maybe Morgan Freeman.
No, a lot younger.
Well, I mean, younger Morgan Freeman.
Okay. Which I'll have to do a comparison.
Yeah, which is for me is a compliment, you know.
Yeah, very much so. We're recording on a Thursday. How has your week been so far?
Some portions of my research work here, the interview sections, I just kind of started that again yesterday, and I have one or two more lined up for the next week. One of the things that I'm trying to shed as somebody who is part of the Black Afro-diaspora is this mentality to always be busy, even when you're sick, right? Even when I was in bed, I was calculating, okay, what do I need to do? Which is opposite to how I'm normally running, and how that's been detrimental to us, despite us being socialized to be always doing 2, 3, 4, 5 things, right?
I was just watching on Netflix. There's a series called The Outsiders, and I won't give too much away on it, but if it's available where you're at, I actually want to rewatch it again because that came up, Black creatives across the spectrum in Europe, in North America, and other parts of the world, the ways that we're indoctrinated to work twice as hard, to be perceived as being half as much.
Mm-hmm. It's something that's driven me. However, my body has been telling me to slow down because this is the second time I've gotten fairly sick. You know, again, we in the Black diaspora have been socialized to, like, we got to do better than everybody else. Work twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times as hard as the next person. But that's actually killing us. Most of us don't even take time to have a proper vacation. We don't know what that is.
You bring up for me these expressions. I know some of them that come out of the U.S., like we're strong people, we're warriors, these things that I don't know much about it historically, but I would assume those are ways that we have found to survive. It's like, you know, strong Black people. And of course, we hear the strong Black woman trope. And I'm really happy or grateful that in the last few years, the last 4 years or almost 4 years in particular, that we're starting to say to each other, like, hey, I'm human and I can't just be doing that all the time. And like you said, I don't have to be going all the time.
Yeah, I think part of that it can't be disconnected from the larger systems that have come to define who we are. It's linked to the history of enslavement, and we were enslaved, or labor was stolen from us, the value extracted from us. And part of surviving in this capitalist system is to sell your sell your labor for wages. But as people who have been produced in a racial hierarchy, we are perpetually exploited. And that means to get some meager scraps to survive, we had to have worked twice, 3 times as hard, multiple jobs, just to get by in a system that's built off exploiting people and the land. And so how do we refute that idea, and demand that rest is a part of reparation, right? Because of the sort of financial insecurity that a racial gender capitalist system has produced, we often face material insecurity. And so maybe we don't want to turn away jobs or gigs, or we try to create multiple areas of revenue. And this can also go to, you want to be the best in university.
That burden of, well, I'm representing an entire planet of people. 99% of them I will never meet. You just reminded me, actress, comedian Phoebe Robinson. I read her book several years ago, and always being aware of when I go outside. It's not a case of I need to go to the market to pick up a few items, so I'm going to throw some sweats and flip-flops. Or she said, put the scrunchie in my hair and run over there, because something that is perceived as casual by the larger community, by us, is seen as suspect. You're suspect because you look a little too casually dressed.
Right. Yeah. And this comes from a history of framing people of African descent, first Africans and then African descended people in the Caribbean and the Americas and Europe, as other. There's something wrong with us intrinsically. We're just not quite the same as other people. And so it requires, just like having 2-3 jobs, it requires us proving ourselves, attempting to prove our humanity. And I understand the ideologies that are doing it, but then because we live in a society that says we should be on our own, we should be independent, we should be competitive, that's how the world is organized. Oftentimes, Black people, and especially Black, queer, gay, non-binary people, because of those very same ideologies, many of us don't have the at least reliable social, definitely not family network.
So I definitely want to delve a little bit more into that a little bit later, especially connected to your research and what you're doing right now as far as studies and just your professional experience in general. But I had mentioned in the intro that you are in Germany, but is that where you're based?
I live between Germany and Toronto.
Okay.
I lived full-time from 2008 until 2016 in Germany. I actually applied to university in Germany, but for some personal reasons, I decided to apply to ones in Canada as well. And University of Toronto gave me a scholarship. That meant not necessarily commuting, but being away from my then partner for months at a time.
What brought you to Germany from Canada?
Oh, wow. So, funny story. With one of my close, bestest friends. He's a Jamaican-Canadian, born in Canada to Jamaican parents. We met in 1997. Fast forward 2 years, we were in the gay village. And I had texted him and said, hey, let's go to this bar. Let's go hang out. And he went ahead of me. And I went to this shop in the village on Church Street. And there was this tall, like 6'4" white guy just staring at me. And at that time, I'd never found white men attractive, never dated. I leave the convenience store. He follows me out. Long story short, We get to talking, me and this guy, and it turns out he's from Germany. And we spend the night talking, and he was flying back to Germany, I think the next day. And he invited me to come and visit him. So I came to Munich in February of the next year. During my visit with him, about a week before we're supposed to fly back to Toronto, I met my ex-partner. At that time, you would walk down the street and you would see no black faces. This is like 2001, 2002.
So if I understand correctly, the 6'4" guy was not the guy that you formed a relationship with when you got to Germany?
No.
Okay.
We had a little bit of contact, but not much afterwards. Yeah. The second guy that I met in Germany, we dated for a bit and then that broke off and then it was restarted again. And then he surprised me for my birthday in January of 2007. He flew to Canada. And then we decided to give it a go by having me move to Germany. And so that was a year in planning. Yeah.
How was it you adjusting culturally from coming from North America, from Canada, and then discovering yourself living in Germany?
I think when I first moved to Germany, which was in 2008, I didn't have too much of a preconceived notion about Germany. I certainly didn't know much about Germany then, other than what was in the movies, and popular culture. My sensibility, my cultural socialization in Canada, in Toronto, with Jamaicans. And even then, I did not know much about Jamaican history or our collective history as part of the African diaspora. Nonetheless, what I did have helped me to navigate friendships I was gradually building in my place in Munich society, I should say, or within Munich culture. Okay. But at the same time, too, I never really built any long friendships with Germans. It doesn't mean that I didn't try. And so most of the friendships that I was starting to build, and some that I still maintain to this day, are people from the US, the United Kingdom. My view on the world being Black definitely played a role in my refusal to ignore certain things.
I perceive that there are some similarities between Canada and the US in the sense of we're never not aware of how we're perceived around being Black people. Do you think that is part of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first friends I met actually was over this gay dating website. Nothing sexual, but friendship. So we were, for a time, pretty close friends, and I feel that I'm an open-minded person. I will be friends with almost anybody if you're a decent person. For a time, we were good. But I remember one time we went for a walk, and he said to me, "You're pretty smart for a Black person."
And this is a German person?
This is a white German. He's from Bavaria. And my ex-partner, when I told him, he's like, "Why are you friends with this guy? He's a loser," right? And so that kind of tells you the sort of environment I was in.
Okay.
This repeated itself numerous times over the years. I always sensed that I was by myself in explaining or sensing that what somebody was saying, about to say, had said, was going to be deeply racist. And because it was just so normalized, nobody challenged it because they were part of the majority group in that city. At the time, they had this thing called an N-word kiss.
What was it again? I'm sorry. What was the name?
It's called the N-word kiss.
Okay.
I think it was like a chocolate or something like this.
I see.
And these are things that I was gradually getting to know while living in Munich in the early aughts. I had people constantly asking me where in Africa I'm from. And when I would say, "Oh, I'm from Canada," even they didn't believe me. is not just that the person who is being offensive, as in racist or sexist or misogynist, it's that the people who that you would trust to have your back and believe you are persistently also second guessing you or downplaying the severity of the racism.
The emotional violence of it.
That's kind of how I ended up with mostly friends who I'm not going to argue about this. On certain topics, they're not up for discussion. To like make sure my circle of friends were not gaslighting me. Many of the white gay German men tend to be more receptive or open-minded to the history of anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism than the ones that were coming from the US. That being said, that meant my circles of friends became smaller.
Where do you think that comes from, this innate desire to champion or to say, I will not allow you to limit who I am?
It's partly to do with my mother's personality, which I'm sure I have portions of. And I spent a significant amount of time of my childhood in Jamaica, for the most part, not with my biological family. I had to survive on my own. Not having that protection, but also witnessing and observing how other people are treated and people just stand back and do nothing. I think that's kind of what drives me, because I know what that feels like, and instill within me a strong sense of right and wrong.
Is that because of being queer?
In part, yes, because from a very young age, I knew that I was different. I never went around announcing with a trumpet and frills, I'm gay. I never came out to my family. I never said, hey, can you all come together? I want to tell you I'm gay. I never did that, ever. I've never felt ashamed of it, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. Coupled with my early childhood experiences in Jamaica, I just never felt that I could just stand by and not say anything.
It seems too that it's also connected to your experiences as a researcher and also your studies. Can you share about that?
All of my work is centered within Black studies, but with a focus on the experiences of Black gay men, or men perceived as gay and African, with a focus on Berlin. Within African or Africana studies, oftentimes there's an assumed heterosexuality about Black people or people in the Afro-diaspora, that we're all heterosexual. A lot of research has been done in the US and in Canada and Great Britain on Black queerness or queerness in the Black community, but not so much within Europe, and definitely not in Germany, because Germany refuses to collect race-based data. The research that has been produced in Germany on first Afro-Germans and then Africans and the Black communities here oftentimes have a heterosexual lens, fails to account for both gender, race, and sexuality together. There is often a focus on Black women or Black lesbian writing. What about Black gay men or men who are queer or trans men within the Black communities? What is life for them like in Europe, in Germany, in Berlin? Because we know from research in the US and Canada, the UK, when you draw race, gender, class, sexuality together, you get a much more nuanced picture of what it means to be a Black gay person, a Black gay man, a Black trans person, and our ability to basically make our way in this world, right? A world that's deeply anti-Black, trans, anti-poor for sure. And so this overlapping marginalization exponentially increases our exposure to violence, lack of resources, lack of solidarity, lack of care, and our ability to just thrive. It doesn't mean that we're not living, finding love in some form, having sex. It just means that we have even less resources to do it. And so part of that research directly comes out of my experience of being unhoused in my youth, as I had to leave my family home, but also to living on my own since a very young age, having dead-end jobs, just barely surviving, right? But I would say that I'm probably one of the more lucky ones. And so that's really how I came to focus on Black gay men or men of Afro descent who are queer or gay in Berlin.
Has there ever been, or are there currently networks for Black queer men, either online or in person? Not so much maybe dating, but if that's part of it, but definitely maybe socially.
There are queer networks and there are Black networks, not necessarily a Black queer network. There's a small group of Black gay men that I've met through my work.
What is your goal or your desire for this type of research to do in the long term?
That's a good question. I've been asked this recently. It would be to kind of say, this is what's happening when we don't look at multiple identities together, has experience accessing housing or employment or dating or accessing government services, right? And hopefully policies can be developed around that in terms of how can we understand and perhaps contribute resources for people in this particular community to access the resources they need? Or how can we focus our effort into dismantling Black homophobia or queer racism, racial fetishization, creating more awareness, reduce the harm, at the same time to the potentiality of creating policies that would increase not only awareness, but their ability to access equitable housing and sustain long-term employment, for instance, right?
With this platform, what I've discovered so far, and some people have kind of said it, especially in the beginning, the assumption that because we made games, generally speaking, in Black communities, legally, and in some ways socially, and then also in queer spaces, but a lot of people in both those camps and in general societies not realizing that we are still very much in the shadows and left out.
Yeah, I think that when you look at any sort of data collection, oftentimes it's like, well, Black people are experiencing this, but if you were to add categories of sexuality, right, as they do gender, you'll get a different, more complex picture of what's happening. You will see oftentimes that Black gay men, Black gay women, Black trans women tend to be more poorer. Maybe we don't have the educational background that is demanded by the workforce. These are things that I'm hoping that my work will be able to add to the conversation, especially for policymakers to consider what area has been neglected when it comes to resourcing Black communities, specifically in Germany, or Black gay communities as well. Because, as I said earlier, Germany has refused to collect race-based data on account of its Nazi past. And that's the reason they keep using that as a reason to say, we're not going to collect it because race is not real, but racism very much is real. I think it's the United Nations or another NGO that have been demanding or saying, hey, you need to collect race-based data because this is what's been happening in Germany. And recently, I think in last October, Germany was ranked the number one place for anti-Black racism in Europe. And so, what of the Black queer man, right? Especially with the stereotypes around Black men, being perceived as threats to communities, definitely as threat to white women or white people. And so,
Right.
what are those experiences in space when a tall 6'2" Black gay man tried to access resources? Right, he's dealing with both, not always, sometimes issues of him being his sexuality, but most often than not, is to do with race.
It seems like, too, intentionally or unintentionally, in not collecting this data, that's creating the perception, oh, it doesn't exist in this country, which goes back maybe to what you said earlier, that, people start to gaslight you. Well, we don't have any data that proves that. Are you sure that that's what happened to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, they don't collect it, and they don't want to talk about it. Usually, if they want to insult you, that's the first word that comes out of their mouth is the N-word. So they clearly are aware.
Which is not a German word, I don't think, is it?
No, but then they will want to debate, it doesn't mean the same. Different, And if you're in the gay community as a Black gay man here, it's usually BBC.
For those of you who are not aware, not the British broadcasting.
No, it's not that for sure.
We haven't all been employed there.
So yeah, no, if you're a Black gay man in Berlin or Germany or Europe,
or the US.
The US often as well, that there's a challenge of dating because you are just seen as what's between your legs, right? For their sexual gratification.
I like the way you put that, their sexual gratification, because my experience with dipping in and out of online dating is my own gratification is never usually considered.
No, it's not. It's really more, I want to see what is it to be with a Black. And so again, holding and accounting for sexuality with race can shed light on what it's like for Black gay men within queer spaces, both physical and online spaces, their attempt to meet a partner outside of just craven sex.
When I was younger, when I first came out, I was going to those areas that had the gay bars, and I didn't have the language for it because I initially thought, it's because I'm not dressing a certain way or I don't have a particular personality. And then I eventually realized, I think it might be race.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first time I went to San Francisco, which we know the history there, the positive history around the queer community,
mm-hmm.
I was like, I'm kind of feeling the same way here too.
Mm-hmm.
But I intentionally, for my own self-care, emotional self-care, I don't, in the almost going on 5 years of being a digital nomad, I don't visit those areas in the UK and South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I was briefly in Germany, and Sweden doesn't necessarily have a gay community, Stockholm, but there are gay bars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go, but I don't say that to people who are not Black. Mm-hmm. Because I've been asked by, acquaintances or friends, you should go to the gay bar here. And it's like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because part of human well-being is that we are social creatures. You want to feel loved. You want to feel desired. You want to feel that you're part of something. The reduction of Black men just to an appendage strips away that humanity, means that many of us are going much longer without finding a life mate, if that's what you want, right?
Yeah.
And it means an increase in loneliness and does impact your mental health well-being. Accounting for sexuality in terms of one's ability to feel or be seen as desirable, as attractive, as sexy, as a potential life mate is important. It is important for your well-being. It's important for you to thrive. What does it mean for those Black men such as us, where we are met with those 2:00 texts, when you could just, I only know you at 2:00, but not on the street. don't even want to say, hey, let's meet for coffee, let's go for dinner. What about those men who are in interracial relationships with partners who can be anti-Black? It's a whole nother ballgame for Black men who have partners who are not Black and either live with it or have consistent contention. And this has been my experience.
Okay. It's a lot to unpack, but it's all necessary and, in my opinion, good stuff. Do you have any work that's published that can be seen by the general public?
No. No, I don't. I have been asked. I've been afraid. That's the truth.
Okay. Why so?
I submitted one piece that I thought was up to par. It's for an edited book. I submitted it last August, and I just heard back from the editors. And it's written from my perspective about being Black and gay within a Jamaican household. Again, if I'm truly honest, I've been afraid because I think my work is not that good. So I'm such a perfectionist that I want it to be super great. But that's something I'm learning to let go of.
No, I can relate to that. And I'll say thank you so much for joining me. And thank you so much for sharing your experience and your honesty. I really like your honesty fused with your intelligence. I think you're just a really great speaker naturally. In my opinion, that probably lends itself to you also being a good writer and definitely a researcher. I always end with asking if you have any final thoughts or insights.
I guess what I would maybe go back to is that for us as Black queer people, as Black gay men, we must try to resist the idea that we are less than and that we should basically grind ourselves, just to get scraps. And this is coming directly out of my research with some of these men and just my general observation is that we're always doing extra, but we should be attentive to that cost. And perhaps we need to refuse to save ourselves, right?
Okay.
I'm actually thinking about this movie. It's called The Girl with All the Gifts. I feel that Black people, but more specifically Black queer people, are the canary in the coal mine. Black queer people of Afro descent have been queer. We've always been different within this knowledge system, but our actions have always served as a warning call to the violence of the organization of this life. That being said, thinking back to The Girl with All the Gifts, which is a British-based horror film, I'm thinking of the main character, Melanie. She's a Black girl. She has the only cure for the oncoming apocalypse, to stop the apocalypse, basically. And the white scientist, who I believe is played by Glenn Close, asked her, hey, are you not going to give us the cure? Are you not going to let us cure everybody? And Melanie is a zombie, by the way, because she was infected. Melanie replies and says, yeah, it's the end of your world.
Okay.
So Melanie chooses to let it burn down. When I think about all the organizing that Black queer people have done, like Marsha P. Johnson, for example, people like James Baldwin, who've tried to warn the world, along with Black women, that the violence of this system on us, the economic, but the physical, psychological, and emotional violence, they have been canaries. When I think about myself, but also to the men that I've been working with and the effort to maintain a life, Melanie keeps coming back to my mind. I'm like, what if we just let it all burn? Start over. And I know, it's something that haunts me, but I do think that there's something to think about. Perhaps we have to start saving ourselves.
I don't think that's selfish. I think focus on myself, focus on us collectively is I don't want to keep proving my humanity to you. I want to focus on how we can heal amongst each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Self-care is warfare, and maybe sometimes withdrawing.
Thank you for that. And just lastly, where can we engage with you online?
Instagram, Black Metamorphosis.
Okay.
It's usually a mix of personal and political photos or commentary, because I don't think there's a separation between the personal and the political. It is both.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.